Corporate social responsibility is a concept that investors and regulators use to measure whether corporations are playing by the rules. And the problem is that the rules are not standardized. They're not always clear, and that leads to all sorts of problems. And Professor Andy Hira at Simon Fraser University has written a book about it. So welcome to the interview, Andy.
Glad to be here.
Andy, let's start with a definition of CSR. What does it mean?
Corporate social responsibility has long roots in religious movements in the United States. For example, the Quakers did not want any of their money going into tobacco or alcohol firms. But really, we're talking about a modern concept that originates from the 1970s in relation to a series of environmental disasters, such as Chernobyl and 3 Mile Island. And at that time, there was increasing pressure on corporations based on these environmental disasters to think about their responsibility to society at large beyond just the bottom line.
And how is it used by investors in the modern context?
It's very important and of increasing importance to investors, particularly in regard to climate change. As we know, there are a series of movements around universities and municipalities towards towards fossil fuel divestment. And the idea is that the pension fund holders and institutions have to start making socially responsible investment decisions. And so this is starting to affect the way corporations think because corporations all rely on a steady stream of capital to run their operations.
Right, and so investors use these CSR scores and financial institutions as well when they're deciding whether to invest or loan to companies like oil and gas producers. So, what were the top conclusions that you arrived at in your book?
Well, no investment manager can follow all the things that a company is doing around the world. So, as you mentioned, they rely on these ratings firms, such as those from Bloomberg, for example. And these ratings firms then aggregate data about a company's activities around the world, and they start to give them scores in terms of their level of social responsibility. So my investigation really wanted to look into how robust is the information that goes into these scores upon which trillions of dollars of investment decisions are being made on a daily basis. And when I started digging into some of the data, what I found was that there were some ambiguous parts of it. For example, some of the ratings firms, or most of the rating firms, will not disclose the exact formula by which they reach these composite scores of social responsibility. They do that as proprietary information. Secondly, when I found other sources of information about human rights violations or major disasters that corporations were involved with around the world from NGOs and news sources, I did find that information appeared in the ratings agencies' aggregate data. However, when you look at the composite scores, it's based on sometimes dozens of different variables. And so one particular incident of a human rights violation may not show up in the overall composite score. So this is obviously very problematic because an investment manager is seeing dozens of indicators, but a particularly egregious event could get buried beneath all of those different variables. And more importantly, beyond obscuring this information, is that investment managers won't be able to follow through on whether a company is engaging in generally good socially responsible practices.
Do you have any recommendations for how the system can be reformed?
Well, I think the most important thing is to have transparency of information. Information is power in the financial world. And what we have now is a polyglot system of different kinds of information and variables and reporting that is happening across all different kinds of these ratings aggregators. We need to start with some concrete, transparent, and independent reporting on the ground about what's happening in terms of company activities. Most of the system right now is based on self-reporting, and therefore it's subject to a conflict of interest. Even where you see third-party auditors, those third-party auditors are hired by the companies themselves. as well as the UN, which relies on company funding to run its global compact, for example. So with these inherent conflicts of interest, it's no wonder that there is skepticism about the information system as a whole.
Andy, is the system, does it need tweaks and repairs and patches, or is it broken in some fundamental way that it can't be repaired?
Well, I think there are signs of movement forward, particularly in regard to climate change, less so in regard to labor rights or community benefits. Because climate change is viewed as an existential economic threat, there are shakers and movers in the European Union and in the US, including the SEC, including Michael Bloomberg, the head of the Bloomberg reporting company, to try to move towards public regulation of information disclosures. So companies listed on the New York Stock Exchange would have to start to report in a very regular way about their climate emissions. And that obviously would be a game changer.
Well, Andy, thank you very much for this. Really appreciate your insights.
Thank you for the opportunity.